It shocks me to say that, but 20 years. When I first arrived, all the questions we ever got from about immigration had to do with, could you look at this newspaper? I think there was an event. I'm looking at something in this country. This person is here trying to seek asylum. Da, 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 da. Could you document and let us know that that event actually took place right on this day? So we found ourselves constantly in the newspapers, right? Now, what do I see? Artist books.
In this episode, we speak with Esmeralda Kale. Esmeralda is the curator of the Melville J. Herskovits Library for African Studies at Northwestern University. Welcome to Parallel Perspectives. Esmeralda, how are you doing today?
Thank you very much for having me today. I am very well, and I'm extremely happy to be here with you.
Can you share some of the most significant items or collections housed in the library, and if you can explain to us their importance to the study of African studies and African American or African diaspora and history and culture across board, not just only in the North Atlantic, but also in the continent. But before you can go ahead with that, answering that question, can you give us a brief history of the collection and the library, and how long you've been working there?
Okay, so the Melville J. Herskovits Library was founded in 1954 by Melville J. Herskovits. Northwestern was looking for a student of Franz Boas, and so he was encouraged to come to Northwestern to open a department of anthropology. So in actual fact, he is the founder of the anthropology department here at Northwestern. While here conducting research, he was down in the Carolinas. He came across the Gulagichi language, right? And realized that this language was a language that came with people. So it had come with the people, the slaves who came to the Americas. And this really sparked his interest. If you look at the work of Lorenzo Dow Turner, he has done great work on that language, okay? While Herskovits was also in Brazil doing research, he starts to realize that the largest population of Africans outside of Africa are in the Bahia region of Brazil, right? So he comes back to Northwestern with this vision of, we need to study the continent of Africa, right? Not just studying the continent, but across all aspects. And so one of the things he lobbies for is the library. He writes some of the earliest grants for the founding of this library in order to build a collection. And then he sets about developing what we know with colleagues across the country as the African Studies Association, right? So in some ways, he's very much a founder of the discipline of African studies. And working collaboratively with colleagues, he goes on to do very interesting work. So this is who we are. We have been collecting in all languages, the African languages, and all formats. And sorry, let me just back up. When I say all languages, not just the African languages, but the languages of Africa's colonial past too. So all those European languages, but African languages if it's written, Arabic also, and we collect in all formats. Posters, photographs, of course, monographs, fabric, objects. I would say that the collection is in conversation with itself, right? So Africa is heavily present on the shelves, as well as European voices too. And that is a conversation going within the Herskovits. What are the highlights of the collection? I would say we have really good archives. of some of the founders of African studies, Hunwick, Vansina. I would say we also have Herskovits, but Herskovits sits in university archives because he taught at Northwestern, right? So his archives don't sit within the Herskovits; they sit within university archives. We have, as I said, strong archives. We have a phenomenal poster collection. We collect posters from across Africa, election posters, film, posters, health posters, and they really document each country. We have a strong video collection, which has now gone to DVD and streaming platforms. Newspapers, print newspapers, extremely strong in the area of newspapers across the continent of Africa. And, we're growing from strength to strength.
Thank you. Thank you for that insight. If I can take one more question before Benita can come in, I want to kind of look at that balance between preservation and accessibility in curating historical collections, like what you do at the Herskovits Library. I want to ask, how do you approach curation of African and African diasporic materials in a way that both they preserves, what the historical integrity is retained, and how do you make them accessible and relevant to contemporary audience? By contemporary audience, I mean both artists, curators, scholars, researchers that need access to these materials. How do you kind of make these materials accessible in that it's located in a specific kind of geography like the Northwestern University, where not only students, maybe I can say students come in because they have access. How do you make these materials? Because I know you have quite a lot of items and rare books and all that stuff. How do you make these materials accessible to contemporary audience?
I think I should prefix this answer with the fact that I work with a wonderful group of colleagues here at Northwestern University Libraries. I say we're at the top of the building. Yes, we're on the 5th floor, but everybody below us supports us, right? So I have a wonderful acquisitions team that, I submit requests to, orders to, and they make sure that those things are processed and those collections come in. We have a wonderful preservation and conservation that are responsible for the care and handling of our materials. So if things need to be repaired, if things are torn, if things need to be deacidified, they take care of that for us. And then we have a wonderful digital team. So I can decide on what I would like to see digitized, and they will work out the how to get that work done. Whether it's print, whether it's film, whether it's audio, they will figure how to get it done and present it to our public. So a lot of these things, in some ways, are I am assisted with, and it allows me to focus on what it is I'm trying to acquire, what it is I think is relevant for the collection. Because I know once I've done that, or once I've identified something and decided that, okay, these are the funds I'm using to acquire that thing, I know that it's going to be presented in the best possible way to our audiences if we have the time and energy to focus on it. You might be surprised to know I do a lot of listening to the radio. As I sit in my office, I am listening to BBC, I'm listening to Al Jazeera. I'm trying to find out what's going on in Africa, what the relevant conversations are. And it could be just a film release, because these are the things that are going to inform me to look for what the trends are, what's going on the continent and in other parts of the world that relates to the continent. Even just listening to Europe's discussion of what's going on in places like the Sudan could inform on what I acquire. And then I'm getting email from vendors, especially rare book vendors. They send you their catalogs, they email you on a regular basis. And I'm looking at what is out there in terms of old materials that might be coming onto the market. So as I stand with one foot in the present, looking at current events, I'm also looking at historical events too, to see how these things are reflected in the collection. How can I strengthen things? Are there things that need to be strengthened? Are there new areas that need to be highlighted and focused on? And then when those materials come in, then you can say, can we digitize this? How can we turn it into something that is of visual interest to maybe people outside our community? And I'm talking about the community on campus and the people who communicate with us via email, right? Who regularly come to our site. It's difficult, It is difficult because to a certain extent, sometimes you feel as if you're doing things in isolation. And so this is why I'm sure you see me out and about on campus a lot. I'm out and about on campus because I want to know what faculty are interested in. The really interesting thing about this collection, which started out as reel-to-reel film, was the objects. A wonderful scrapbook from 1953 in which this woman's aunt had collected. She had all her travel receipts, all her luggage tags, maps of where she had been, things she had bought with the price tags on them, right? And it gave us all this stuff. And then in addition to that, it was like the films came, at the very end, but it was all the stuff in front of it that was, to me, the most important and the most interesting. I was able to take this collection with the help of colleagues who had cataloged it and everything and leverage it in a journalism class, an investigative journalism class, where the students then started looking at 1953 Cape to Cairo, Africa, and sort of plotting this woman's trip, but visually and bringing in all the history from that period and telling a story, a visual story. And so I say this to say that there's so much opportunity in these materials, whether it's print, whether it's photographs, that you just constantly have to be thinking, how can I layer, how can I inform? How can I strengthen? Right. And then hopefully, if you publicize it enough and get your name out there, people will come. People will come. We see a lot of people from museums right now, curators from museums right now, looking at the Herskovits library, coming to borrow materials for their exhibits. And I think it's because the word has gotten out. It's a strong collection, especially 60s, 70s, 80s material on the continent. And a lot of people are looking at these materials right now. And we see a lot of requests for loans. I hope that answers the question.
Personally, it answered more than the question. I think it gave us a lot of insights into how the collection contributes actively to culture today. Thank you for giving us a broad view on that, because I am also still very interested in learning about how artists and curators, gallerists, museums on the African continent, for example, and in other parts of the world where you have the African diaspora creating, how the ongoing developing body of work from the contemporary art scene is still actively being acquired, even if it's just like a documentation of it being acquired by the Herskovits Library. I'm interested in knowing a little more about that, because I imagine that it would make, another interesting story for the next generation after, just like how you mentioned stories from or archives from the 60s and 70s and 80s are being sought after today. I believe that documents of contemporary practice today would be sought after tomorrow as well. So I'm sure you've heard of, a lot of art fairs and exhibitions and films. Like you said, you put your ear out for these news that are going on, where artists reflect on times and almost sort of prophesy also about what's coming or what should be. Artists dream, and artists also mirror society. All right, so Art X Lagos, for example, brings artists from all over Africa to Lagos, Nigeria. And there is the art fair in Ethiopia, and there is another one in Morocco. There's another one in Morocco, Marrakesh. And then there is Bamako and Dakar at Biennale and so on, and even the Lagos at Biennale as well, and the Lagos Photo Festival. Some of these festivals, art festivals and cultural shows making their way into the library as well, like documents of it or pieces of, the show.
I would like to see more of that. And I sometimes think there's not enough of me to get around the world, especially on the continent of Africa. But I will say, and I think maybe people come in here might not know, we do have vendors in Africa who collect on our behalf, right? And more as these things emerge, these festivals and these events, if I can't go, I'm now trying to say to our vendors, this is something I'm interested in. Can you get us materials on these things? Because I think our vendors on the continent tend to focus on the usual. They don't focus on the unusual, right? And so I think it's sort of my responsibility to point out the unusual and say, this is what we're interested in, because those are the things that set the collection apart from other collections and make it more unique.
I'm sure you know that the work that you do as a curator for the Herskovits Library is really shaping history. Also, for those who are curious about it and curious enough to learn, it's like, yeah, history has already happened. I'm not necessarily like shaping, but at the same time, you're creating an avenue for people to educate themselves about culture, about society, about Africa, and Africans on the continent and all over the world. And it's just it's another way to shape history. I think it's a really powerful thing to understudy. And thank you for sharing. I have two rapid questions for you because we are short on time, and so you have to give me very short answers. Is that a deal?
It's a deal.
Okay. Okay. So the first rapid question: on the subject of unusual versus usual, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much does the Herskovits Library shock people who have very poor stereotypes about Africa?
Oh, I'd say 10.
People who think we live in a jungle in Africa.
10.
Okay, thank you. Because yeah, when you talked about that, I remember thinking about a friend who had told me about how, she was doing some work in Paris and all they kept asking her were masks. Like, oh, why don't you just make a mask? Why don't you just make a wooden mask? Just do that, And so I hope that people who seek to really learn find out that there is more. There's a variety of artwork that can come out of Africa. There's a variety of, artistic and creative expression and works of all sorts as well. All right. So the second question, oh my gosh, I think it's leaving my mind. I don't want to let you go. But the second rapid question is on immigration. There's a big shift on, how much of Africans are moving from Africa to the West and to other parts of the world, even Europe and so on, just because of maybe economic reasons or so many other challenges. How has this changed the dynamic of how works or materials are being acquired by the library?
So I've been at the Herskovits 20 years. It shocks me to say that, but 20 years. When I first arrived, all the questions we ever got about immigration had to do with, could you look at this newspaper? I think there was an event. I'm looking at something in this country. This person is here trying to seek asylum. Could you document and let us know that that event actually took place right on this day? So we found ourselves constantly in the newspapers, right? Now, what do I see? Artist books. Wonderful artist books, like interactive artist books that document the movement of people using poetry and other creative means. And for me, it's just like, oh, and so we can leave it up to, as we unfold and open up these materials, you can then leave it up to interpretation and understanding by the people who are using these materials. And I think, wow, look at how we're talking about immigration.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Esmeralda. And I want to say I'm very appreciative that you were able to make out this time in your very busy schedule to share some of the insights, the great work we are doing at the Herskovits. Personally, I benefit a lot from what you do. And I would say continue doing what you're doing. It's very vital. It's also very relevant for the way, like Benita said, the way we view the continent. There's a lot of stereotypes, but your work helps us to kind of question those stereotypes. And I'm very appreciative of what you do. It's great. Thank you so much for coming into Parallel Perspectives.
Benita, Uche, it has been a pleasure. Thank you so much.